Hi, this is Josh from BrightTALK. I'm here with Mikko Hypponen, Chief Research Officer at F-Secure.
Right.
Mikko, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start with some current affairs and the current American-Russia muscle flexing.
Right.
How much do you think cybersecurity has kind of an influence on that, on the tension?
Well, it's having a bigger and bigger impact overall. I mean, it's quite clear that we are now seriously in the middle of a real cyber arms race, if you will. And it really only started a couple of years ago, and I think we've only seen the very first steps of the next arms race. We were in the middle of nuclear arms race for 40 years, and that's now past us, but we are now seeing the first steps of the next arms race, and most likely it's going to be with us for the years and the decades to come. And we often hear references to things like cyber war, and almost always those references are just misguided. I mean, typically when they speak about cyber war in the media, they talk about APT attacks or surveillance or spying, and none of those things are war. But when we now look what's been happening over the last couple of months in Ukraine, well, that's a different story, because it's clearly Russian attacks targeting physical critical infrastructure inside Ukraine, and these countries actually are at a war. So I think that really is cyber war. I don't see what else we could label it with.
Sure. And what about if we look at it on the kind of civil level? We're seeing a lot more ransomware attacks on hospitals, on universities. What do you think that those aspects of critical infrastructure can do to protect themselves?
The mega trend behind all these problems is virtual payments. I mean, blockchain inventions and Bitcoin in particular were the things that enabled all of this to happen. We never saw successful ransomware attacks in the past because they always had the weak point of moving the money. We could always follow the money and see where it went. Now that Bitcoin exists and it's accessible to anybody, it's clearly being misused by these criminals to do the ransom cases against consumers and against companies and against public sector, like we've seen with hospitals and others. And I'm not saying that Bitcoin is bad, it's not. It's a tool, just like cash is a tool.
Yeah.
I mean, real world criminals prefer cash as well. It's kind of hard to buy cocaine with a credit card, or so I've been told.
Sure. So you've kind of touched on the cryptocurrencies, and we're seeing a lot of the digitalization of banks, with the challenger banks and mobile banking apps and so forth. How do you think the security is going to keep a pace with these technological developments?
Well, criminals like targeting banks, of course, because that's where the money is. But most of the attacks that we've seen are not actually going after banks' own infrastructure, because that's actually very well protected. I mean, if you gain access to the mainframes of a large bank, you can steal tons of money. That's going to be very, very hard. What's much easier is targeting the customers of the bank. So instead of breaking into the bank and stealing $1 million, you target 1,000 customers of the bank and steal $1,000 from each, which ends up to being $1 million anyway. And that's much, much easier to do. And that's what's going to happen with these new technologies like, mobile payments and NFC payments and Apple Pay, all that. They will be targeted, but then probably not going to go after the back end, to go after the consumer systems. And the thing that limits the risks is that most of these new things, like new smart cards, new mobile payments, are physically tied to a location. What I mean by that is that if you use your mobile phone to pay, the criminal who wants to steal during that transaction has to be there. He can't be in Argentina. He has to be there. And that's quite different from most of the other attacks that we see, where the criminals targeting you could be anywhere in the world. Now clearly, it doesn't take away the risk, but it does limit the risk. It moves the risk back to closer to traditional crime, where the criminals targeting you are the criminals who live in your city.
Sure. Okay, and as one kind of final question, we've talked a lot about the kind of risks and the threats. Is there an aspect of infosec which is kind of exciting you for the year ahead? Are there any areas of optimism?
I do have a hope for the future. Unfortunately, it's not for the near future. It's a more long-term thing. And it's all about vulnerable systems and how do we fix this permanently. Most of the problems we see are about exploits targeting vulnerabilities in your systems. And the reason why we have vulnerabilities in our systems, like our operating systems or applications, the reason why they exist at all is that those programs are being written by human beings. And we human beings make mistakes. We always will make mistakes, which means programs written by us will always have bugs, which means they will always have vulnerabilities. So, if we want to fix that, we have to take humans out of the equation. So in long term, one day we will have super intelligent computer programs which write our computer programs. I'm speaking about artificial intelligence here, so that's why I mean it's long term. But I think during our lifetime we will see that. We will see artificial intelligence programming new programs that are better than what we can program. And that's going to be a very accelerating change in how well our programs are written. And yes, they might still make mistakes, but those mistakes are going to be so complicated that we humans have no hope in hell trying to figure out how to exploit them. And when that thing happens, things are going to be very, very different. It's also going to be very scary, but it's going to be different.
Taking the humans out of the loop.
Unfortunately, we will no longer be the smartest species on the planet.
Well, Mikko, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're at RSA all week, so tune in to BrightTALK for more content.